Welcome, everyone. Sorry for the few minutes late. We're letting late comers arrive. Thank you for giving these
Welcome, everyone.
time.
Sorry
Oh,
for the few minutes late. We're letting
I don't know what just happened. Some technological problems, but Rahim is going to help me deal with that. And so, welcome to this talkback. This is an event featuring Rahim Flower and his newest book, The Mental Health Guide for Cis and Trans Guys. My name is Marco Posadas, and I'm honored to guide you or guide us through this meaningful conversation. I am a psychotherapist and a psychoanalyst in private practice in Toronto, and I was invited to do this talk back. I'm gonna read Rahim's bio first, and then I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how I met him. Rahim Tower is a registered social worker, psychotherapist, and Canadian certified supervisor. He's also a consultant, a public speaker, and a writer. He's the founder of Effective Consulting and Psychotherapy Services, through which he delivered nearly over 200 presentations, actually, and talks, and has inspired critical conversations and reflections on mental health, interpersonal effectiveness, systemic oppression, and innovation in queer relationships. He's from Toronto, and he teaches in Tuscaloosa at the University of Alabama, where he's a full-time instructor and also enrolled in the doctorate program of social work. As a queer Muslim, his clinical work and scholarship consistently explore the intersections of mental health and systemic oppression, and his doctoral research focuses on how anti-racist, queer-affirming, and psychoanalytic frameworks can better support social workers, therapists in training, and organizational leaders. I really would love to share everything about his CV, but mostly I'm going to focus on the multiple awards that he has received lately, so you get a sense of how hardworking he is. Um, he has been the recipient of the Mary Smith Arnold Anti-Oppression Award for the Counselors of Social Justice and the American Counseling Association in this year. He also received the Honorary Award in Education from the Salvation Americans for Change this year as well. He had the DSW Award for Writing to Advance Social Work and Social Justice from the University of Alabama. And last year, he was the recipient of the Ontario Association of Social Workers Distinguished Leader Award for the year 2024 for Toronto. Um, he also was co-editor of Any Other Way, How Toronto Got Queer, a book that was published in 2016, which was nominated for the Toronto Book Awards. And he also self-published for clinical guides addressing assessment, treatment planning, documentation, and countertransference. Uh, Rahim, I met him in 2009 when I was running a program called Towel Talk that provided bathhouse counseling or counseling in bathhouses. Rahim was part of Aqua, and he had just finished his undergrad. So I know him for a very long time. He's someone that I respect and admire a lot, and his work has inspired has inspired me in so many ways, from doing sexual health prevention to counseling in bathhouse to making the links at Hassle-Free Clinic, all the way to working with youth, to being part of Sherborne Health Center, to doing a master's in social work, training in Gestalt therapy, in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and tons of CBT training and group training, and working with other organizations like Salam in Toronto. And now he's in the US doing what seems to be the impossible. So I'm very proud and honored to be here and introduce you to Rahim. Uh, to say something.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I uh, I love the timeline you provided because 2008, 2009 was a while ago. And it just makes me think about how much we've both grown and how I've even come to see the profession of social work over time, um, and how I've come to understand clinical psychotherapy work.
Hmm. Thank you, Rahim. Before we start, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement in Toronto recognizes the city's location on the traditional territory of numerous indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Toronto is also within the Treaty 13 lands and the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Treaty. Land acknowledgements are a way to show respect and gratitude for these indigenous nations and their ongoing presence on the land. This talkback is designed basically to spend some time discussing with the author of this book that I hope everyone here and there's a book, everyone here and whoever's seen us in the live stream in YouTube um, can get it because it's fascinating. Um, well, well, uh, Also, I would like to thank Another Story Bookshop in Roncesvalles for sponsoring this event. And that's one of the places where you can find this book as of tomorrow. So this book comes out June 1st. So I had the opportunity to write almost all of the book. I'm nearly done. And I find it fascinating, Rahim, the way that you write makes it very accessible for people who are interested, well, basically queer men who are interested in accessing mental health services or starting to think about their own mental health, but do not have the tools or the words to think about it. As a queer Mexican immigrant, psychotherapy culture in Latin America is very present in here in Toronto after the pandemic, we can see a boom in mental health. But historically, in North America, mental health has always been seen as something that is wrong or that you shouldn't talk about it, or that if you go, that means you're really ill, versus if you access psychotherapy, that means that you're getting the supports that you need. And your book provides a really useful approach to how to think about accessing mental health and particularly focus on three different uh, theoretical frameworks, which would get into that later. But tell us, why did you write this book?
Thank you. Well, when I began working in the HIV sector in 2008, 2009, I was, of course, interested in sexual health, HIV prevention, education, support, treatment. But part of my interest was dictated by some external forces, right? We had an AIDS epidemic in our community. And thereafter, any kind of sexuality and homophobia work was funded through um, this channel of HIV related funding. And anytime I wanted to do like a substance use group or an anxiety depression group or to talk about relationships, I found that we often had to relate it back to sexual health. And
Mhm,
that's okay. But the way I think about queer men's mental health is that there are many determinants that exist in our social environment. And sexual health, present day, and the legacy of AIDS is but one or two of those determinants. And so I really wanted to acknowledge and honor the impact of the AIDS crisis on
mhm,
our mental health, but also to decentralize it a bit so that we can look at our mental health and the determinants, the things that drive it, the things that influence it in a broader way. So I wanted us to think about like internalized shame, homophobia,
mhm,
biphobia, what's it
mhm,
like to live in a body conscious culture, And the other part of it is to distinguish our experiences of the world and therefore the determinants of our mental health from our cis and straight counterparts.
Hmm.
I think there's so many presentations I had gone to around LGBT mental health, and a lot of them would talk about how queer people are disproportionately affected by a particular thing.
Hmm.
And so, great, now what? you know, all that says is that there's something happening in, systemically or culturally or societally that makes us more susceptible to something. But what's underneath it, right? So I could have depression and my straight friend could have depression, and we have the same label, but the determinants are going to be different. And so in
Hmm.
this book, I wanted to go through my own lived experience, the experience I've had counseling queer guys, and really think about what are all the things, that affect our
Hmm.
mental health outcomes. And so
Hmm.
chapter then represents that. So that's where it came from.
Thank you, Rahim. For I noticed that in the audience we have a mix of people who may not be psychotherapists and clinicians, and some clinicians that I know in the community and also writers. But so, what is the core message or affirmation that is at the heart of this book?
I would say that there's a couple of core messages. uh,
Yeah.
it's that, okay, um, your world, your personal world, your subculture, your environment is going to have a huge impact on your mental health outcomes. So you need to figure out what are the things that influence your mental health. B,
Hmm.
here is a list that I'm providing that I think affects queer men's mental health. Uh,
Hmm.
and part three is that there's no one way to work through it, but rather we need to process, we need to engage with each of those determinants. So, for
Hmm.
example, people often will say employment is a determinant of mental health or physical health. So, meaning that if you have employment, you'll fare better. Okay, great. But what kind of employment? What if you don't enjoy it? What if it's
Hmm.
a dream? What if you have conflict with everybody in your environment? So naming the determinant itself is not enough. We need to go deeper to see how you move through it. And there's no one formula for like achieving the perfect outcome. And so we need a variety of therapeutic tools to see how we can move through it. Um,
Hmm.
and so my message is that there's things in your environment that affect your mental health. We need to figure out what those particular things are, and then we need to see how you're going to move through it. And my book provides some tools for queer guys to move through the common influencing factors of mental health.
Oh. So, what do you hope a queer reader who doesn't see themselves in the traditional wellness spaces takes away from this book?
Well, I'm hoping they can see themselves in it. There's case
Hmm.
scenarios and case studies throughout. It's a self-help book. It's written in a tone where I'm speaking directly to the reader. So I'm hoping someone will pick it up and feel like it's a conversation, help
Hmm.
at that. And they can look at the titles like internalized shame, aging, substance use, coming out, and see what applies to them, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so many people that I know who are looking for therapists will go on a website and they'll search through people and they'll email me and say, well, I know what I'm going through, but what these people are listing are their credentials. So there's a
Hmm.
bit of a mismatch, or they'll say, this person says they do CBT. What does that mean? Can I apply that to the issues I'm going through? So this starts with the issue
Yeah.
before the modality. And so I think that is makes it a bit more user friendly.
Hmm. And I want to remind the audience that we have the chat box on Zoom. So if you feel that you have a question or a comment, even though you haven't read the book that you want us to answer, please feel free to use it. And so, Rahim, you mentioned that this is a self-help book. What about the people who either have never read a self-help book or hate self-help books because of the popular assumption, the pop culture assumption about self-help book that we see in so many shows where someone is crying in the hall of a library in the part where there's the self-help book. So what about these self-help book specifically?
I would say what you're describing is called stigma.
Yeah.
And it's fine. I also hated self-help books until I wrote one. Um,
Yeah.
so it's
Thank you, Farsana. We have Farsana saying that she loves self-help book and crying in bookstores. I love crying as well, and not only in bookstores, but thank you.
um, and so here's the thing, right? Like it is going to therapy or talking about difficult issues that affect your life requires you to confront something. And that's going to come
Mhm,
from a mix of emotion, right? Likely anxiety, fear, maybe shame. Um, if you have difficulty identifying what it is that's bothering you, it could be frustration. So if you can push through some of the stigma and the additional embarrassment, if you can
mhm,
draw on a bit of self-confidence to allow you
mhm,
to be holding a self-help book, I think things could be better for you, right?
mhm, mhm,
This it's just, going to buy a self-help book. We're talking about the same thing that prevents people from getting a therapist, right? Or one of the things. And so sometimes people will say to me, "It took me 6 months to even start looking, and then I started looking, and then I found your name." 6 months is a long time. So
mhm,
that's part of the therapeutic process, in fact. But
mhm.
if it's to get a book, maybe it'll take you 3 months.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And if I can say this, the parts of this book is quite accessible, and the information that it has in it. Is way more what you get in by paying one therapy session. And so it can really help people deal with the internalized stigma of accessing mental health. But also one of the things that I love about the way that you write that is so personal. For instance, the first sentence with which you open your writing, it really grabs the reader to feel something. I like experiences where what I'm reading allows me to connect with it at a visceral level, feeling it. Um, so, if you can share something specific about like what was the process of writing this for you? Is there a particular part that you want to share that can help people understand how deeply this connects with you as a member of the queer community?
So I'll tell you about the process, but you mentioned to me yesterday that you liked the first sentence, and I was like, I don't know what he's talking about. So I went back to
Uh-huh.
the book,
Yeah.
and it says, since before you were born, other people have probably had expectations for you and who you were going
Uh-huh.
to be. Those expectations might have been dreams or visions about your future or hopes or fears for it. The people holding those expectations might have been your parents, grandparents, siblings, extended family, family friends, communities, doctors, or even strangers. The expectations were hopefully good, but might have been bad. And perhaps
Yeah.
didn't include you being gay, bisexual, queer, or trans.
Yeah. So
So,
that's the first paragraph. But the first sentence grabs you at a
yeah,
way that it made me feel those expectations, not the ones that since I was born, because I don't remember, but a lot of the ones that were imposed on me, uh, and that I had to carry. And so as a clinician, it really hit home at a personal level. And I've been in therapy for years. I've been doing this for many years. Uh, and so it makes so palpable
mhm.
the burden that we carry for living in a cis heteronormative uh, environment.
Yeah. And so uh, um, that sentence, uh,
Hmm.
it comes from a memory I have of being in a hospital a room in Mount Sinai when my first nephew was born. He's now 8. So it was
Mm,
over 8 years ago. And he's born, and my dad made a comment about who this kid could be.
mhm,
My dad's first dream was that he would be a leader in our Muslim community. And I turned to my dad and I said, "Oh my gosh, I think we can dream bigger than that. Like he could there's so much more. Like what? Like that's very specific. Like that's like I don't know. Like that's like climbing to the top of a mountain versus climbing the top of the hill in Etobicoke only. Like what is it?
yeah.
But I have for a long time thought about how we internalize expectations and how that is a trauma for us, right? And
Mhm,
it's so difficult, those internalized expectations, because when we feel like we don't meet them, we compensate for them in other ways. That could be one of the explanations or ways to understand our body conscious culture as gay men or queer guys, right? Uh,
mhm.
kind of compromise formation, if you will. Um,
Yeah.
there's also um, something to be said about the immigrant experience, right? We talk about
Mhm,
normativity, but which is all encompassing. But for a lot of immigrants, the experience of migration is laden with a narrative around sacrifice and intergenerational gain. People love to talk about a 5-year plan. People who immigrated had a 30-year plan, right?
mhm.
Because their kids were going to be an extension of them, and their sacrifices were going to be worth it because of what they could pass on. And the queer experience and the queer, um,
Immigrant experience.
yeah, well, being a queer child of immigrant parents, that queer lens disrupts that dream in many ways. And so you're confronted with the grief of like not passing something on. And
Yeah.
what is that like? So that's where that one sentence came from.
Yeah. And you can see in that
Yeah,
way, how the banality of day-to-day living can impact so much our mental health. What you're talking are literally the specifics of queer mental health and queer racialized people and immigrants. I wonder if the audience doesn't mind this, if we get a little bit more into the clinical part. How do you approach internalized oppression with clients and in yourself, and using the tools on this book?
mm. Yeah, this is a challenging one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Well, if you want, I can give you a hint from your book, because there's an chapter, I think it's chapter 3 that
Mhm.
you talk about. No, well, chapter 2, you talk about homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia.
Yes,
And in the first part, where you're describing your social context, you speak about those prejudices and then also internalized shame. Uh,
I see.
and
Okay,
so,
yes. So there's a couple of things here, right? So we're living in a time where lots of people want to see a therapist from a community that they belong to. And
Mhm.
that can be very nice, but that comes from what Dr. Mellon Forrest calls a similarity of disadvantage and assumed sameness. And she
Yeah.
talked about what shows up in the transference, meaning the expectations, templates, preferences, things that get activated for the client when they're with somebody who they assume to be very similar to them.
Yeah.
And while that can provide a lot of safety, if you're queer, the client's experience can trigger a lot of your own shame. It can trigger a lot of your own stuff, right? So if I'm talking to a queer Muslim client and he's really struggling with his religion, his sexuality, he's experiencing a lot of homophobia, um, the thing that gets activated in me might actually become a barrier for me to provide good care.
Yeah.
If you're a heterosexual cisgender person and you're an allied professional to the queer
Hmm.
community, um, you might not have that same kind of activation But what might happen is the client will bring problems to you that come from a world rife with prejudice. And unknowingly, you might align yourself with a homophobic world. So, for example,
Hmm.
if a client says, I'm feeling a lot of shame around having sex with men, um, or I feel guilt or shame around anonymous or casual sex, that heterosexual therapist, not realizing it, might say, well, maybe that's not good for you. Maybe that doesn't align with your values. Maybe we need to find a way for you to find other kinds of meaningful connection. Now,
Hmm.
it doesn't sound like a huge kind of homophobia, but it is a significant microaggression at the very least, because
Hmm.
it doesn't recognize that part of coming out and part of grappling with your sexual identity is also grappling with the shame imposed upon you and your sexual behavior from a mainstream straight community.
Yeah.
So what the therapist has ended up doing is colluding with dominant systems to penalize the client and structure a treatment plan to get them to be more sterile, more heterosexual in a way,
Yeah.
and that's entirely unhelpful.
Hmm. Hmm. And the amount of people that go through therapeutic process that experience harm at the hands of the clinicians, coming from a well-intended place,
Mhm.
usually is an anxiety place or a lack of training. And so this book can help also straight people, straight clinicians that want to get a sense of the populations that they serve, whether it's in private practice, providing psychotherapy, but also in community settings
Yes,
that provide programs that are peer-based, because it really provides a sense of a very in-depth understanding from different perspectives. Like you use three different modalities, and we're gonna get there. But I wanted to explain for the people who may not be familiar with psychoanalytic terms like transference, what it is. And so transference is patterns of relating that we learn as we grow and we internalize, and they become embedded in our nervous system. So as we repeat relationships, those patterns will serve us to complete the type of relationship and experience that we have. So we tend to relate in similar ways, depending on the way that we um, love someone, how close we are. In a nutshell, that would be what transference is. But going back to your book, Rahim, you use three different psychotherapeutic modalities. I'm very biased towards one of them that I love. Some people may know. But basically, you use cognitive behavioral therapy that the acronym in CBT, and in the queer community, CBT means something else. So we're not talking about CBT. We're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. You also talk about Gestalt therapy, and you use the more accessible term psychodynamic, but you basically is psychoanalytic psychotherapy theories and approaches to your work, which I appreciate how you connected us digging deeper. But can you tell us a little bit about why you chose these three uh, frameworks or metapsychologies or ways of thinking mental health?
yes. So there's two layers to this answer. The simple answer is that's what I was trained in. So, but the more
Yeah.
complex it is, the more complex.
Well, wait, no, that doesn't give you justice. You also were trained in motivational interviewing, trauma informed, sex positivity, harm
Yes,
reduction.
yes.
Like there's all of that,
But you're
but
right. You're right. So for CBT, the basic premise is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are connected, right? So
Mhm.
if you're in a situation that activates difficult feelings, anxiety, anger, frustration, disgust, you get to think about in a very linear way what the
Mhm.
thoughts are that are related to that feeling. And the goal in CBT is not to give you an affirmation, but to give you a realistic alternative thought. So, for example, if I want to go to a bar, I want to meet new people, and I want to go on my own, and I have a lot of anxiety, so I never do it. The therapist might,
Hmm.
okay, what are the feelings you have? I'd say anxiety and fear. How would you rate them? Both 10 out of 10. What are the automatic thoughts that come up? People will think I'm weird. People won't like me. No one will talk to me. And then the therapist might say, and if that happens, what does that say about you? Oh, it says, I'm not successful. I'm a complete loser if people don't
Hmm.
agree. And then we would say,
Hmm.
let's evaluate some of these thoughts. Like,
Hmm.
has there been times in your life where people didn't talk to you or did talk to you when you were in a novel situation? And what was that like? And then you might come
Hmm.
up with an alternative thought that says, based on my past experience, it's likely that somebody will talk to me. Also, based on
Hmm.
your past experience, somebody might not talk to me, and it doesn't have very much to do with me.
Yeah.
So now I would say, okay, where's your anxiety and fear? Oh, maybe 6 out of 10. Great. It doesn't need to be zero, right?
Hmm.
It just needs to be, it's about changing your thoughts enough to contain the feelings that hold you back. And
Hmm.
CBT provides people a linear way to work through a very concrete situation. And that's what I like about it. So when people come in and, in my experience, when people do talk therapy and they get frustrated that I'm not sure what I've done, I find CBT can be a great way to say, here's what
Yeah.
you've done. Remember this, that, and the other. Now, Gestalt therapy is about contact, uh,
Hmm.
and it talks about something called a contact cycle. Every time we try to initiate a way to connect with people or to connect with our own needs, and there's certain things that disrupt that contact cycle. And in Gestalt, there's something called what people regularly refer to as unfinished business. And
Yes.
one of the ways to um, explore unfinished business is the empty chair exercise. And so I don't do a wide range of Gestalt techniques, but I do the empty chair. Now,
Yeah.
the empty chair is about role playing a conversation with another person that where a conversation wasn't possible. It could be with an earlier version of yourself. It could be with an older version of yourself. It could also be with a part of yourself, the part of me that's anxious, or it could be the body part that I criticize. And so it really is like what I would call a surplus reality. you know,
Yeah.
you kind of you bring something alive that otherwise doesn't have a voice. And so in the book, when it comes to the homophobia part, or it's can I talk to my childhood bully, and what's that like?
Hmm.
To my younger self or my older self when it comes to aging, when it comes to substance use, can I talk to the substance? Like, can I have a conversation with alcohol? Can I have a conversation with the pipe? You know, uh,
Yeah.
for another drug. So it's what like the surplus reality where you have a conversation that's unlikely, and it's about the experience. And people will ask,
Exactly.
what's the purpose of that experience? Well, the point is to close the gap between the different parts of yourselves, right? So that
Hmm.
you have a more cohesive understanding. And um, well, I lost my train of thought, but we'll leave it there. So you can have a
No,
cohesive.
let's stay with those two, and then we'll go to a third one. Just to summarize for the people
Yeah.
who are not so familiar with these terms. And so, in cognitive behavioral therapy, like the name says it, it provides tools to engage with cognitive, so thoughts
Mm.
that change behavior. So actions, and you were talking about catastrophic thoughts, the way that we tend to imagine the worst. And by allowing people to engage with their thoughts through the tools that provide in your book, it takes the edge that the world is gonna end type of experience. No, like it gives language, it puts name. A lot of my experience working with queer people who have never accessed psychotherapy is that it becomes really scary to think about these things. And cognitive behavioral therapy puts name, numbers, 1 to 10, and it makes it really empowering the idea that you can actually change a thought that will influence the behavior. And now moving on to Gestalt, I think the word in German means like completion or a complete experience. And so our brains tend to move for closure. So seeking closure, seeking to close the experience. So if I had a loss that I wasn't able to resolve, my brain is going to insist in closing that.
Mm,
Then engaging in relationships that probably will leave me feeling the same type of loss. And so, as Rahim mentions, the empty chair provides a possibility through imagination, which is basically self-dialogue with one, about that experience, what it meant. And if the people in the audience have the opportunity to access Gestalt therapy, it's so interesting. Even dream analysis through Gestalt and using the empty chair is fascinating. I once had a dream about a dinosaur, and I had to put the dinosaur in the chair and then exchange that and be that dinosaur in the dream. And the things that you can get to think when you allow yourself to play with your own feelings in the safety of the therapeutic setting. I think this book provides that to play with yourself before you dip your toes into psychotherapy, no? And so why psychodynamic, which would be the third frame?
well, here's the thing. Since I've been teaching at universities and colleges, which is a lot of years now, psychoanalysis has gotten a bad rap, and people will say, "Oh, Freud," and I'm like, yeah, it started there. There's a lot more, and people have critiques of like certain theories, uh, like psychosexual stages or the Oedipal
Mhm.
but at a basic, like without all those theories, if you have a 1 hour session, um, if you have a fee, if you talk about early experiences, if you speculate about unconscious, like defense mechanisms, if you talk about attachment and relationships, psychodynamic therapy is still intact, even without all the other bells and whistles, you know?
Mhm.
And people are doing that already. People,
Yeah.
when all other modalities, um, where there's a gap in other modalities, therapists go to a psychodynamic place. They just do
Mhm.
that already. And pop culture and like TikTok therapy and, Instagram therapy, it's rife with this kind of information around attachment, the unconscious. And even
Yeah.
when people talk, like social justice activists talk about colonization and they talk about white supremacy and they talk about capitalism, the insidious ways that it affects our lives, they're often talking about the unconscious.
Yeah.
So the idea of the unconscious and that we have one is a psychoanalytic principle. And so
Yeah.
for me, I think it's important for people who want to talk about early experiences, they want to talk about attachment, they want to talk about defense mechanisms or something that's going on in the unconscious, that there's a few questions that support that,
Yeah.
right? Because we're all doing psychodynamic therapy or psychoanalytic therapy. We're just not calling it that because stigma, shame, not enough training, what have you. So it felt really important for me. And I will say that this book is and having these three modalities is new for new Harbinger Publications because in our earlier conversations, they were steering me more towards CBT because of the evidence base, and I had to bring some knowledge to the table around like how do we label things as evidence, right? Like if
Yeah.
with more insight, which is what
Hmm.
analytic theory does, is that not evidence that they're doing better? If they say at the end of therapy, I had a profound experience, which is what Gestalt often provides, is a memorable experience. Is that not evidence? Because that's what I get all the time, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, so it was important for me to combine these three. They're all evidence based.
Yes, and I love that you're touching on the evidence-based part because just because CBT was designed to compete with medical trials
Mhm.
doesn't mean that the other modalities have not been researched. So there's tons of evidence that psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic psychotherapy is very effective for different type of mental health experiences. You talk about the unconscious, and you talk about how many psychotherapies rely on that concept. And in fact, for the audience who may not know, because I have told this to Rahim, I don't know how many times, uh, the father of CBT was a psychoanalyst, and the creator of Gestalt therapy was a psychoanalyst. And so there's a reason why psychoanalysis continues to be current, even when Freud was a man of the Victorian age and carry all those prejudices into the theories. And that is a fantastic segue as to what are the uses that people can do to this book from general audiences uh, to queer people interested in mental health to queer clinicians.
Yeah. So there's lots of uses for this book, right? It's a self-help book, so you could read it yourself and work through it. You could also work through part of it, and the parts that feel unfinished or you want to process more, you could talk with a trusted friend. You could take to your own therapy. Um, so there's many ways an individual person can use this. I would say,
Mhm,
if you're a therapist and you want to get a sense of what kinds of questions to ask your clients who are queer. You're thinking about different kinds of things you want to include in your assessment, issues you want to dig deeper around. This book would give you quite a roadmap for how to do that. And like you could also, if you work at a nonprofit organization, you could create a therapeutic group around it. So we've got determinants of health and mental health for queer guys. There's 15 chapters. Each one has one determinant. And so each of those could be a session or multiple sessions. And you've got a year worth of programming, really, because the,
yeah.
the exercises are there. And if you go to the New Harbinger website, there's free tools. So for each chapter, we didn't waste any space in this book with blank lines. This book is like, it's all text. So for each
Yeah.
tool, if you want more information or you want the blank forms or you want to go deeper, for example, the stuff around relationships and seeking connection, there's lots of additional handouts you can get on the website. And so those are
Mhm.
to support individuals, but largely, I think, service providers who can then find ways to use this in their practice. Finally, I would say, I think social workers and counseling psychology students could also use
Mhm.
this book in practicum settings or in their school work. Um, somebody had asked me like, is this a product of your doctoral program? And I said, no. I'm just started my doctoral program. It's not
Mhm.
that kind of research, but
Mhm.
uh, if somebody
Hey,
wanted, they could
mhm.
do research and look at the determinants more deeply. Like if you were a social work researcher, for example, you could go more deeply into any one of the determinants to explore the impact on queer men's mental health. I have not done that.
Yeah,
I have
that's
been.
okay. But like this book is built on clinical experience. I was fascinated by the cases that you provide. I think it's the first book that I see that each case presented is a racialized person, a queer and racialized person, and even when there's someone who's not a person of color as a client, because of the diet, because you are the clinician, that uh, therapeutic diet becomes racialized,
Mhm.
and without really putting a lot of emphasis in it, you kind of sneak spinach in the brownies, meaning that you provide so much nuance around how to work with racialized queer populations that is really missing out there. So I find it very very refreshing than doing the typical translation from reading text from the 80s or from the early 1900s, where everything is white, and then as we go through training or as we go through therapy and we're interested in reading more, we have to do that internal translation that
Mm,
ends up perhaps also creating a little bit of alienation in our own understanding of our mental health. You've been mentioning also the social determinants of health, but there may be some people who don't know exactly what are the social determinants for health and the connection to mental health for queer people. I wonder if you can give us the Reader's Digest of the social determinants of health that you rely on for your book.
yes. So the mental determinants of health framework is something that is used by the World Health Organization um, and the government of Canada. Uh,
Yeah, wasn't a Canadian researcher that came up with that?
yeah. So
Yeah,
um, I don't want to say it for sure, but I do think it has its roots in
I remember in social work, that was one of the first things that I learned.
And so the idea
Yeah.
is that there's social factors like employment, housing, gender discrimination, um, uh, employment, experiences of violence, early childhood trauma, access to food,
Mhm,
kinds of things that determine your health outcomes, which makes sense, right? If you can't afford good food, you will eat bad food and you will be
mhm,
unwell. That just makes good sense.
mhm,
Now, the Mental Health Commission and CMHA have gone further to talk
mhm,
about a few determinants of mental health outcomes, and they
mhm,
focus on experiences of discrimination and exclusion and
mhm,
belonging, because the research has shown that a sense of belonging and being having support when as you experience oppression having
mhm.
support as you experience oppression have big impacts on your mental health outcome.
Yeah.
So that's where that came from. And
Mhm,
I was developing a course some years ago on mental health promotion, and I came across this book by Manoj Sharma that's called The Foundations of Mental Health Promotion, and she
mhm,
has a whole chapter on the determinants of mental health, and it's really interesting because that's the first time I saw it there. And she talks about like hardiness, which I think in popular culture people talk about as grit, uh,
okay.
self-esteem, access to optimism. She's got all of these things that are, and there's these psychometric scales to analyze or to evaluate these. And I love that uh, because that's the first time I've seen it, and that gets me excited. However, my lens, because of the work I've done at Sherborne Health, at the AIDS Committee of Toronto, has been more population based. So
Mhm,
I love
mhm.
Sharma's approach. I love, love, love it. And I could share that information with people, but I really love something that's population based. So that means like, what are the determinants that drive your mental health? Because in
Yeah.
community, there's a subculture or multiple subcultures. And you're a queer Mexican Canadian person. In the variety of communities that you navigate, you know that there's like a different internal hierarchy, right?
Mhm,
You know what it means when uh, somebody makes a gesture or gossips about somebody who comes underdressed to an event. There's all kinds of
mhm.
questions, the way we talk about them. So in queer men's community, this happens around assumptions about money, who's spending time with whom, what part of the city you live in. You can get categorized as a bear, a circuit queen, a this, a that. These like internal hierarchies, nuances, they have associations to systemic power,
Yeah.
in many ways, not always, but in many ways they do. And so for me, I'm thinking about like, what is our understanding of the subculture in which you operate? And what is your proximity to power? And how are you affected by your lack of proximity to that power?
Yeah.
How does that affect your mental health. So, for example, in a very concrete way, when I talk about internalized shame, right?
Hmm.
For me, a lot of my internalized shame at the it doesn't necessarily come from my internalized homophobia. It comes a lot from my internalized racism.
Yeah.
And so that means, in the dating world, I might seek proximity to whiteness. And
Hmm.
the experience could be affirming or it could activate my shame.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to look at there. And so internalized racism and its expression as internalized shame would be a determinant of my mental health, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? So that's how I'm thinking about it, population based.
Absolutely. And for the audience, but the term population comes from public health in the way that communities are measured in terms of health promotion. And so taking it a little bit to make it more accessible, in your book, in the part of relationships, I really like that you did not use labels in terms of boyfriend, man friend, fiance, marriage, husband. These labels that carry so many expectations, like going back to the beginning of our talk, and this hierarchization of needs, but also of relationships that end up being sort of like a sifter for power. There's a chapter called Seeking Connections. I think it's Seeking Connections, yes. Which is a chapter that you used to talk about the relationships that we build as queer men and trans men. Tell us more about it.
Well, thank you for this. This is one of my favorite things. And that's like in my bio everywhere. I talk about like I'm interested in innovation in queer relationships.
Mhm,
So relationships affect
mhm,
their mental health. Lots of people are seeking connection, but it's not about having a boyfriend or not having a boyfriend, right? It is the landscape of connection seeking for queer guys that is the determinant of our mental health outcomes. It's how we navigate the complexity of a
mhm,
dominant culture, a dominant heterosexual culture that taught us about monogamy, long-term relationships, marriage. Um,
mhm,
and none of that is bad. It's just one thing that was taught to us that seems fixed and also it's been coded in our brains for a lot of people as normal, natural, and neutral. And then you
mhm,
come out into a queer community or a gay men's community, and you have this acculturative stress, which is the stress that comes with acclimating to new norms. And
mhm,
because our sexuality and the way we have sex is what is like it's the fodder for it's 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 the disgust that's at the center of other people's homophobia that we
mhm,
internalize. And we come out into a community where casual sex is celebrated, right? And
mhm,
so many gay men imagine themselves growing up in a small town, flocking to a big city. Well, what happens in a big city? The city itself supports your anonymity. It supports your singleness. It supports your ability and access to casual encounters and more queer men. And so
mhm.
we can't discount the importance of casual encounters when we created an
No.
architecture to make that happen, right?
Yeah.
And at the height of the AIDS crisis, places where men had casual sex, like bathhouses, this is where HIV prevention happened and continues to
Mm,
happen, right? So I would say for a lot of queer guys, they experience both rewards and challenges, psychological, emotional, for pursuing casual encounters and longer term partnerships. And for a lot of people, they want both. But
mhm.
there's value in separating these things to say, what are the rewards? Why do you look for this thing? What are you hoping to get? And why are you looking for this other thing? What does it mean when you don't get it? In our culture, in our community, I think long term monogamous relationships, long term open or non monogamous relationships short-term, non-monogamous, short-term, monogamous relationships. All of these come with reverence and critique. Reverence meaning people look at you with a bit of envy.
Yeah.
You want to be you. We live in a subculture where, you know, fine, you came out already, but now to actually be gay is to participate in the subculture. It's to, be able to go to brunch and to talk about your sexcapades. And so it can feel being like the casual encounter, making it happen can feel like an achievement, which is a source of validation around identity,
Yeah.
right? So one, I want people to think about how do you navigate this complex terrain and the internalized messages from multiple communities. Do you
Hmm.
identify with the idea of acculturative stress? What are the rewards and challenges you experience when you want to pursue one thing or both things or many things? Like a quick example, if I want to pursue casual sex, a reward is that I get to be a new version of myself because I'm meeting somebody brand new. A challenge is that I likely have to use an app where I might encounter negative messages about bodies, about feminine gender expression. I might experience racism,
Ageism.
ageism, all of the things, right? So it becomes complex in that way. And to that end, in my book, I have three chapters. One is seeking connections. There's a whole chapter about endings in queer love,
Yeah.
about people who have been in longer term relationships and want to end or think about ending in ways that are counter to heteronormative scripts. And then managing rejection, right? Because if we're seeking encounters, how does, for people who have anticipated rejection at an early age, right? You know, as a result of being queer or trans, how do those schemas, those internalized core beliefs get activated when we're being rejected all the time in this game of online dating? So I wanted to really tease it out because I think the landscape of connection seeking is one like the biggest determinant of our mental health.
Yeah. And especially if we're putting our value externally, meaning I'm worth more if I have a partner. Uh, then if there's a relationship that is not working and I'm hanging on to it, and then I break up, all the value that I was placing or that I was drawing for myself may make me feel worthless.
Hmm.
And so I may choose to stay in a relationship that is not good for me just because I'm not feeling good about myself. And
Yeah.
so I think your book provides a way of thinking that gets you out of heteronormative context and allows you to play a little bit more. No pun intended, play with yourself. Yeah.
um,
Is yeah, no,
Oh,
please.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that's kind of fun about the book, and I had to do my own research to write that part, these parts is like the different kinds of rejection people experience. I put a name to some of
Hmm.
them, and then
Hmm.
to do some myth busting around um, uh, monogamy or types of relationships. So I draw on the concept of the relationship escalator, which is
Hmm.
work with. Of course, it's cited, but that part was fun because those were ideas I had that I was like, oh, people have talked about this, and I got to bring it into the book. And already, I've had a few people comment on those sections, and they're like, oh, I hadn't thought of this. I'm like, great. I got to really borrow and draw on other people's work to revive it or bring it to my audience as well.
Hmm. Now, I want to switch gears for the topic of substance use and harm reduction,
Yes.
because it's such an important theme for queer communities. And so there's how do you envision this book being used by peer support workers that do harm reduction in settings, or also for guys who use substances
Hmm.
as a way of coping with feelings and from a harm reduction approach?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So uh, many years ago, 2000, 11. I did my master's practicum.
Not so many years. Come on.
About,
Some years ago.
um, I did my MSW, my master's practicum at the Center for Addiction for Mental Health at Rainbow Services, which was an
Mhm.
LGBT specific program.
For the people who are not from Canada, CAMH is the largest center here in Canada that provides services in mental health and substance use.
Yes. And the I came across the definition that they use in a lot of their educational materials. And I hadn't seen that definition replicated anywhere else. In fact, everywhere I go, I see a different definition of addiction. So,
Mhm.
and the language of addiction itself mm, it's not coherent.
Complicated.
Yeah, like it's not coherent. Everyone's got a different idea. And it comes with different, it's charged and it comes with different weight. So when I think about
It comes with its stigma itself sometimes, depending
totally,
on the model and the setting, no?
yeah. And so I borrow on their definition, which talks about the four C's, which is um,
Mhm.
the experience of craving, using,
Mhm.
despite loss of control in terms of like frequency and quantity, experience of compulsive use, which the way they define it is not impulsive, but compulsive, which is about reducing stress, but also optimizing your time to maximize opportunities for use. So that's how they define compulsion. And then using despite consequences. So they imagine that there's positive outcomes, negative outcomes, and at some point, negative might outweigh the positive. And when you continue to use something, when the negative outweighs the positive, this might be a red flag. So the
Mhm.
model is something I brought in, and I provide harm reduction tools that draw on motivational interviewing and CBT, which is from CAMH's book that they put out many years ago called Structured Relapse Prevention, which like the tools are like the ABC chart, where you look at what happened before I used the substance, what happened during, what happened after. Now I just modified it to say for what happens before, during, and after, what's a harm reduction technique you can use? So, for example, let's say you say my problem substance is alcohol. You might say, okay, Raheem, tell me about the problem substance. How much did you drink at the moment or in the instance where you said it was a problem? Oh, I had 8 drinks. Okay. Now, tell me what happened before that. Oh, well, it was Friday and I got paid. Great. So your trigger was a positive event. It was, I got paid. Okay.
Mhm.
And so, and then you drank. Okay. And then what was the outcome? Were there negative consequences? Oh, I spent more than I intended and I had a hangover, which meant that
Miss a shift.
yes. So in the A, the activity, the B, the behavior, the C, the consequence, there's a harm reduction strategy that can be employed for all of those. So for A, the activator, you got paid, that gets you excited and you want to party. So what you might have to do is have some self-talk there that says you're allowed to be excited to get paid, but you want the fun to last. So you're going to have a budget for for what fun
Mhm.
looks like, right? Because actually, if you can divide that fun across 4 weeks, it just makes more sense. And
Yeah.
you'd say the behaviors while I'm there, while I'm out and I'm drinking, my harm reduction might look like having a soda water between drinks. It might mean
Mhm.
switching from doubles to singles. It might mean having a clear end time for my night. And then for negative outcomes, it might be next time schedule something later if it's going to be a social thing, right? Or uh, put some plan in place. So if you have to go to work, uh, you ask somebody to call you, or you set several alarms so that you're up in time. So in that way, we're not saying don't drink, don't use a substance. We're talking about increasing your awareness and your discernment through
Yeah.
the process of using. That is harm reduction.
And I think the way that you're putting it in the book and that you're describing it right now is, which is a principle of harm reduction, is building a relationship with the substance.
Yes.
uh, Getting to know yourself with a substance, because I think research shows that, and yes, abstinence is an option for some people, but
Mhm.
as clinicians, telling someone not to drink or not to use the thing that they find helpful to cope, it never works.
Agree.
Versus being able to support the client to build a relationship with the things that they find helpful, whether or not they're substances and may have an impact in their liver or their health, they will find a way to learn a relationship that they can get to decide and pay attention to their health. So I really appreciate that perspective of harm reduction in your book, Managing Substances. Um, Anything else? There's some people trickling out that they have to go, and some newcomers to this conversation. We're having a conversation with author and clinician Rahim Thor, whose newest book, can you show it, Rahim? Uh, the mental health guide for cis and trans queer guys is going to be out tomorrow, and we're chatting about the chapters and the process of writing and what is useful. The chat is open for people who want to make a comment or write a question. And something else that you want to tell us about the process of writing this book that was fun for you.
Yeah, it took me a whole year of sending when I first came up with the proposal and sent it to the publisher, between like the first iteration and the final one when they were ready to accept it, because they kept sending it back to say, follow this guideline. We want you to talk to your reader. This is too academic. This is too jargony. Break this down. And it was really,
Mhm.
I really had to slow down to break concepts down, and to imagine talking to like an avatar, so that that's one of the suggestions they gave me. They're like, create an avatar. So I created a client that was a composite of many clients that I've had, and then throughout the book I have to pretend I'm talking to this person, and then
Mhm.
they would say, okay, what if your avatar doesn't understand this, or what if they resist that, and I'm like, oh, for the love of God. Okay, then we have to
Yeah.
change this.
Stop messing with my avatar.
Yes. And so, but that was a very helpful process, because writing in this way was new to me. I mean, writing in general is new to me, but certain kinds of like academic writing comes much easier than something that is written with a self-help tone or language. So
Yeah.
that was the process. And once it began, I would write batches and then submit it to my editor, and they would come back with all kinds of ideas and revisions. And they actually would provide prompts to say, hey, could this be a worksheet? Could this be an extra exercise? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess it
Oh.
could. I guess it could. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so in it that I'm not necessarily thinking about the service user, the end user's lens of what's needed.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and there's even some language, initially that I was using heteronormativity a lot, and they were like,
Mm.
some people may,
Yeah.
some people may not. So not only should you define it, but the way you're talking about it, maybe it becomes its own chapter. And it did. Milestone heteronormativity became its own chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that process was really, it got me in touch with each of the concepts on a granular level, which is,
Hmm.
and so that means that, another clinician could take any one chapter and turn it into a workshop, because it's granular. It's like all the things are there in a way that ought to be ready to share or understand.
Yeah. And so I would like to leave the last 15 minutes because we're going to wrap perhaps 1 minute before the end because I have to jump into another meeting for a discussion or conversation with the audience and questions of the audience. If there's anyone that want to post something or say something or open their camera and unmute themselves, you're welcome. Yeah. We can hold the silence forever because I'm an analyst and I can stay quiet forever. But if there's no one that wants to jump in, we're happy to continue talking. And I'm gonna keep moving so people don't think that it froze the camera, and that's why we're quiet. I hear someone typing.
Sure.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yes. Um,
Thank you,
I have
Jennifer.
I have a question. I work in a residential mental health facility, and we are anticipating the arrival of a trans queer man,
Mhm.
and he has substance use is not the primary concern for him. It's really been identified as a coping strategy, so he's looking at developing other coping strategies. How how would you encourage us or me? I'll be working primarily, I'll be the primary connection with the family and friends and the community support for this person. How would you, how is it best, sorry, the reaction that the family has given him is that if you wanted to date men, why didn't you stay a girl?
Uh-huh.
Mm.
So trying to
Yes.
break through that bias while still being respectful of their value systems. I wonder if you have any helpful hints on that.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. So what gets tricky is when somebody is queer and trans, um, this causes a lot of confusion for people around them. But when that confusion ensues, it's because they're operating from a binary lens and they're thinking about heterosexuality as a goal or like a symptom of wellness, which is very odd to me because I'm a queer person and I'm very well. As a result, what makes me unwell is trying to fit into a heterosexual way of being in the world. So that is to say, there's some education that might be helpful for the family that gender and sexuality overlap, but they can be separate, right? So
Mhm.
gender identity, and I know you know this, Jennifer, but gender identity is very much how somebody understands themselves and how they see themselves in the world, how they feel. And so this person you're talking about feels masculine and they want to use social labels like he, him, um, and their sexuality is best seen as fluid and not having their gender journey should not have a goal toward heterosexuality. It should have a goal toward empowerment and fulfillment. And gender exploration in and of itself is super healthy. So this person who seems troubled or is having difficulty is already more evolved than all the people that's going to be helping them. So let's start there. Because and so some education and support for the family around that can be helpful. Supporting the family around grief, like who they thought their child was going to be and then who their child actually is or is going to be, can be helpful. For the client, the issues that they're experiencing, it's really important that we remember not to conflate the issue with the identity. So if they're experiencing pervasive anxiety, it's important for us not to say, well, is that because you're trans or you're a trans person navigating the world? The anxiety could be driven by many other things. However, to be culturally aware, we need to also, think we need to be prepared to have that conversation because it is very possible that navigating the world as somebody who's gender nonconforming, who maybe is doing masculinity different than other cisgender guys, a person who's maybe doesn't have passing privilege, a person who is navigating a world as a trans guy who's attracted to guys, that could be part of the anxiety as well. We just don't want to jump
Yeah,
to equate identity with the symptom, right? But part of being
exactly.
culturally aware is having it in the background. Um,
And I think if I can add, Rahim, your book does a really good job of shifting from the identity as a symptom to dealing with an environment that is transphobic that creates the symptom. Meaning you're not anxious because you're trans, you're anxious because there's transphobia. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for your question. Anyone else?
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, 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 dun. Uh, anything else
Oh,
that
that's
you,
what my
yes, sorry.
Do have
Yeah.
something
Oh, okay.
to ask.
Yes, please.
Hi. My name is Efrain.
Hi.
Um,
Hi, your friend. Good to
hi.
see you. He's a friend. Yeah.
So, I work on a nonprofit that provides services specifically to brown and black communities
Mhm.
uh, in New York and Puerto Rico. So most of the people that we serve are basically Latinos, and
Mhm,
uh, I am mostly interested in finding better ways to approach mental health and in our community, specifically with our little ones, with the young
mhm,
ones. Uh, we know that they are there. We know that they're going through stuff,
Mm.
but they're not talking about it. And we as an organization, we're trying to find ways to reach out and but it's been hard. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's been very hard
mhm,
because we have to go through their parents first, and
mhm,
that's a huge wall. And it's been harsh. So as I've been listening to this whole amazing uh, thing, I've been noticing that your book might be a light for all of us. So yeah, I just wanted to know if I'm right, if that can be a tool for organization.
mhm,
Yeah. Look, I'm going to let Marco jump in as well because he might have something more specific. But one thing I would say is, when I think about like that concept of population based, my social location is very much in like it's been like in Toronto, and I'm a millennial, and so Gen Z folks or younger folks, how they're talking about mental health, how they're talking about gender, how they're talking about queerness could be quite different. And I think one of the things for in-person interventions uh, is like really getting a sense of what's the language they're using and how do they understand things. And I say that because in Toronto, there's this hub, this health hub that's meant for by and large gay men, bisexual men, men who have sex with men. And one of the challenges they've experienced is like some of their promotional material doesn't speak to the community. So younger folks are like, well, if my gender is this way, then is this service also for me? And the people who work there are like, I guess so. I'm not sure. You kind of fit. So it becomes like a bit of an afterthought, and it's not come. It doesn't come from a malicious place. It's like the providers want to serve this community, but there's a gap in how they understand each other, just because things have evolved. And when in my experience of work, when I work with younger folks, so I often think, oh, they might have anxiety about HIV or sexual health. They do not. This is true. That's something I have anxiety about. That's not what they're not thinking about that. In fact, for young politicized people, it's it's very sexy and trendy to say I have no HIV stigma. Other people can have HIV, no
mhm,
problem. Whether they believe it or not, I don't know. But so to me, I think we need to really think about like what the community is experiencing. One thing that is challenging is I think a lot of people are getting their needs met through TikTok and Instagram influencers. And some of those people do good work, but there's more to be desired, right? There's so much more an individual needs to talk about in their own life story. And what I've seen people do is partner with some of those local influencers that are queer to get them to support bringing people in because a wellness journey cannot begin and end from a screen. Frank, I don't think so.
mhm.
So that's some ideas that come to my mind. Marco, did you want to add anything?
I honestly, I mean, your book is very helpful. It bridges a gap that exists. I think, from the population that you serve. because the cases are racialized and the language that is used is very personable. It's written as if Rahim is talking to you. Uh, I think for the worker, it provides a lot of tools. And I believe through movement and dance and some of the programs that are done in your agency, you have them there. And so again, the phrase is sneaking spinach in the brownies, meaning providing the tools to the worker to find a way uh, to make it accessible for the person. If the person needs it and the tools are helpful, they're gonna use them. That's my sense. Like if psychotherapy actually works, the person comes and stays and works through things. So thank you so much for your question,
I
Efren.
just want to also say, I have a very nonprofit brain and I love to create programming. And I thought, how fun would it be if there was like a mental health psychodrama group? You just went through all the
Right?
good activities.
That's what
There you go.
that's what he does. That's what a friend does. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do social justice through art. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much,
Uh,
guys.
you're very welcome. We have a few minutes left. If there's a couple of questions or comments more, they're welcome. If not, we will move towards closings.
Sure. Let's give them one more moment.
Yeah.
All right. I'm not. I'm.
Well, it seems that there's no burning questions and people dying to keep talking. Any final thoughts that you want to leave us with, Rahim, about your book, about the experience that you're doing in this book tour, and perhaps other projects that you're working in so that people get to know you a little bit more?
Sure. Um, my book tour is just starting and I'm very excited about it. This conversation and conversations like this are like super exciting. Um, my in-person events are all in the US, and I have a couple that are going to be in person in Calgary and in Vancouver that I'll be video conferencing into. You can find links to all of my upcoming events at the.politicized.practitioner.com,
Mhm,
and that'll take
mhm.
you to all my links. And that was a recent rebrand I did, the politicized practitioner. And the reason for that is I have a book coming out with Blue Cactus Press called The Politicized Practitioner. It's actually coming out in three parts. So it'll be three volumes, it'll be a trilogy.
Wow.
And Marco is a contributor, I think, to two essays in that.
Yeah, I have two chapters. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that is written for social workers and counseling psychology students or counseling psychologists to think about how politics and systems of oppression um, show up in the work that we do. And so, yeah, you can look out for that this fall. Other than that, I just want to thank people for being here. I feel very honored. And I want to thank you, Marco. I feel so, you're just gushing at some of the things uh, and when you introduced me. And in truth, in fairness, you were one of my biggest inspirations for becoming a
Thank you.
therapist. I didn't want to. You were my
Mhm.
um,
Thank you.
I had a lot of biases around psychoanalysis, and you helped me through that. And I owe a lot of my success to the mentorship you have provided. So thank you for that.
Mm. For people that don't know, Rahim and I used to work together since 2009, and we would dance and vogue in my office, and then chat about what would happen in bathhouses, and those were very fun days. Thank you, Rahim, for saying that. It's a joy to see your work and see you contributing and getting awards because of how much you're changing the field. This book really meets a gap, not only for clinicians, but for queer people, queer men that that cannot access something because they feel the barrier is way too big for them or it's too intimidating. And this makes it accessible. And so, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for everyone who showed up and wanted to know more about this book on a Saturday morning when the sun is so beautiful. And the book comes out tomorrow. Thanks again to Another Story Bookshop on Roncesvalles here in the Junction. So if you get a chance to go to that store, it's beautiful. And well, without anything more, have a fantastic Saturday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.